for inviting me to do an update at this wonderful meeting today. I'm very grateful to be invited to talk here, and I'm talking on behalf of Dr. Renica Diaz and Dr. Benjamin Wright, who are my colleagues at the Children's and the Adults Hospital here in Birmingham, respectively. And I'll try and tie it in as much as I can with Dr. Bess Marshall and Dr. Fumi Arano's talks beforehand. So I've tried to make this as accessible as possible, recognizing that there are scientists, doctors and experts by experience on the call today. So everything that's on the slides I'm going to say so that hopefully it'll be accessible to as many people as possible. And I'm going to use a similar format to what we did last year. I'm going to start by talking about why we're doing the trial. But I also want to say how much indebted I am to my PhD supervisor, Professor Sarah Bundy, a genetics professor in Birmingham, who first recognized that Wolfram syndrome needed research to try and find out how it was inherited and what was the cause. And Professor Alan Permott from Washington University in St. Louis, who has always been such a wonderful mentor and just found the gene for Wolfram syndrome and was really encouraging for the research both in St. Louis and on this side of the Atlantic as well. So I'll start by why are we doing this clinical trial? So clinical trials have to be done to show if a treatment works before you're allowed to prescribe it in health systems around the country. And the reason for doing a clinical trial is to ensure that there's robust, really strong evidence without any reasonable doubt that a medicine really does work and is safe. So we have to do these trials for regulatory purposes in America and Europe. Now, I come from a background like Dr. Bess Marshall. I'm a children's endocrine doctor, and I look after children with diabetes and other related things. And I'm used to doing clinical trials in diabetes. But we asked all the family support groups a few years ago now what symptom they ranked as most important that we should be trying to target in our treatments. And the number one across the UK, France, the States and Spain was trying to tackle vision. And it ties in nicely with Dr. Bess Marshall's talk from the occupational therapists there who looked at activities of daily living and put neurological features and vision especially as the most important ones that impact on daily life. So I felt that we really had to try and find a treatment that would address the vision issues from here. And I've really had to relearn from that about other areas outside diabetes to try and treat. Secondly, Dr. Bess Marshall talked about biomarkers or something that could be used to actually measure how the condition progresses and that we could use to see if a treatment works. And I'm incredibly grateful to Dr. Bess Marshall and Professor Tammy Hershey and Dr. Hochul and others for kindly sharing the data on the follow-up of the vision acuity. Now, I don't think Dr. Bess Marshall showed the picture, but what I'm trying to show here is that for people with Wolfram from the clinic in Washington, St. Louis, who've had their vision measured every year over a number of years, each of those people's vision tracks, and you can measure how it's progressing over time. And for those of you that can see the slides, each colored line on here is an individual who attends the Washington University Clinic and had their vision measured over time over a number of years. And on the y-axis, or the left-hand side, is the vision acuity. So a visual acuity of 0 is 20/20 or near perfect vision. And a visual acuity of 2 is where the vision is really lost and it's only able to really count fingers in front of the face. And you can see, thankfully, that hardly anybody has lost that much vision on here, but people's vision have progressed from the bottom left to the top right-hand corner of this graph over time. And the big red line in the middle of this is the average rate of progression, which we can then use as an outcome measure or a marker for a clinical trial. What we've been able to do, thanks to the kind collaboration with Tammy Hershey and others, is use this data to say, can we find a treatment that will slow that vision loss by at least half so that it helps people to maintain useful vision well into their 20s and 30s. And we've designed a clinical trial to test a medicine that will improve vision by at least that much, if not slow it altogether. Okay, so that's really why we're doing the clinical trial, and why we've chosen the outcome measure of vision, because it's important to families and we can measure it. So the next question really is, why have we chosen this medicine, sodium valproate? So this really fits with Dr. Fumi Arano's talk earlier on, when he showed a picture of different places where you can use treatments. And on his picture on the left-hand side was gene therapies, changing the gene with prime splicing and gene insertion to improve that, all the way through to protein, improving the proteins, and on the right-hand side, slowing cell death. Now, sodium valproate works on that right-hand side in slowing or stopping cell death, and also one of the basic mechanisms of the condition called endoplasmic reticulum stress. And what we know about some work done in our lab by Dr. Małgosia Zatyka, Dr. WSUK, and Dr. Sele Garani, a PhD student in our lab 7 years ago, was looking at the pathways of how cells grow and how they die. And it's something called a cell cycle, where most cells around the body grow and then divide, and eventually they die through cell death. Slightly modified in brain cells, which don't divide in the same way, but if they get sick, they do go on to cell death. Now, there are special proteins or chemicals called regulators that regulate this process, and they can actually hold the cells in a stable position and stop them going into cell death. And some of the work done by Dr. Sele Garani and Małgosia and Dewey in our lab showed that one of these regulators, P21-CYP, if it is present in our cell model of Wolfram, those cells, it stopped them from going on and dying. But if the levels are very low, those cells are more likely to go on and die. So we thought that if we could find medicines that will increase this cell regulator, hold the cells in a stable place, it gives them time to recover and stops them getting unhealthy and dying. So a drug screen looking to try and increase the levels of this cell regulator found several medicines, and the one that had the best effect was an existing medicine called sodium valproate. So sodium valproate is a medicine which has been widely studied in the scientific literature, and there's well over 3,000 publications all looking at the effects of sodium valproate on the brain and keeping the brain healthy. As well as this, it's been used to treat epilepsy in millions of patients around the world for well over 40 years now. We know it can get into the brain to protect brain cells, both from epilepsy and other brain diseases. And we know that it can help brain cells recover and grow. In Wolfram syndrome, we know that it can improve one of the underlying mechanisms, that's the endoplasmic reticulum. And that's the same mechanism that Dr. Arano is proposing for this Amilex study, which is phenylbutyrate and TUDCO. So sodium valproate works on that same mechanism, but it also protects the brain cells in lots of different other models of neurodegeneration that are known of as well, and it stops their cells dying. So that's why we've gone for a clinical trial in sodium valproate. The other thing is it's already licensed for use, and we've got a good idea on what its side effects are to use. So the possible side effects of sodium valproate we know that are common is it can cause temporary hair loss, which can get better. It can make you feel a little bit sick to begin with, and it can make you feel a little bit confused for a while, but these factors get better over time. Uncommonly, it can cause kidney problems and bone problems. Less than 1 in 1,000 people treated with it have those. Very rare problems, more severe kidney dysfunction. The most important thing with sodium valproate that's become really well recognized is that you mustn't give it if you're pregnant, because it could harm the unborn child. So one of the key things we've tried to do in this clinical trial is regular pregnancy tests of women of fertile age to ensure that we're not causing any harm to anybody who might be pregnant. So we have that. So what are people being asked to do who are taking part in this clinical trial at the moment? So the trial started in 2019, and the aim is to see, is sodium valproate effective and is it safe to slow down the progression of Wolfram syndrome by using the measure of the vision. And it's seeing if we can make it work in children and in adults. And it's designed according to the best regulatory advice of the European Medicines Agency, in a classic way, what's called a randomized controlled trial. Randomized means that we don't know whether participants are randomized to treatment or dummy medicine, and people taking part in it don't know if they're on treatment or dummy medicine. And this is the gold standard one to give an absolutely definite answer beyond a shadow of a doubt, does it work or not, which is what we need to get this medicine to the clinic for patients. It's called a pivotal trial because all the regulatory requirements are built into the one trial. You don't have to do a phase 1, a phase 2, and then a phase 3 study to get this marketed. It's all wrapped into the one trial, and that if it's shown to be effective, we won't have to do any more trials for this medicine to help. And we are aiming to recruit between 60 and 70 participants to take part, to give us enough people to be able to show if the people on the treatment arm, the sodium valproate, have a slower rate of progression of the vision loss or stopped compared to the people in the dummy arm. And what we've tried to do is to balance it so that more people get the treatment than have the dummy. So for every 3 people that take part, 2 of them will be randomized to the treatment, the sodium valproate, and only 1 to the dummy medicine or the placebo. And this is because we obviously want as many people to benefit from it as possible, and as few people to need the dummy medicine as this is possible. So that's a 2-arm, double-masked or double-blind pivotal trial, so it's one only. And it's across several centres, because if we only did the study in Birmingham, people might say, oh, you're doing something strange in Birmingham that's confounding the result or fixing the result. So by taking part in Spain with Dr. Gemma Esteban, in France with Dr. Christophe Ossaud and Professor Agath Roberti, and in Poland with Dr. Wojciech Mulanarski and Dr. Agnieszka there as well, we can show that it can, hopefully, if it works across these different centres, it means without a shadow of a doubt that it is effective and we can take it forward. So we started work on this study, the idea of sodium valproate, back in 2013. With the support from Dr. Tammy Hershey and others, we used that to apply for funding from the UK Medical Research Council, which we were able to get in 2016. And then we had to write a protocol to show how this was going to be run. And we started recruiting people in 2019. So how's the clinical trial going at that point? So as I've explained at the moment, the people sponsoring the study is the University of Birmingham, who helped the design. We ran the design of the trial through the European Medicines Agency to be certain that they wouldn't have any worries about how the trial is running, and that they would accept the results if we could show that sodium valproate was effective. That protocol advice helped us to get the funding from the Medical Research Council, which we got in 2016. Then there was a big effort to prepare all the study documents, the patient information sheets, the study protocol, and source some medicine from this. Because sodium valproate was already made, we went straight to the manufacturers and says, could you kindly donate us some medicine and some placebo in order to do this trial? But unfortunately, because Wolfram is a very rare condition, the manufacturers were only really interested in using it for epilepsy. And so that they weren't prepared to donate the medicine for free or some dummy medicine. So we were able to go to the clinical trials pharmacy at St. Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital in London with some funding, and they very kindly made the dummy tablets for us, and were able to source some generic sodium valproate tablets along the line. But it did cause a hold up because we had to prove that the dummy tablets were stable and weren't going to break down. And we had to show that the shelf life of the sodium valproate would be at least 12 months in order to take part for different centres around Europe to be able to take part. We got all the approvals in 2018 for the UK, and we were able to obtain the medicines and recruited the first patients in Europe at the beginning of 2019. That was in the UK as well. Having done that, with the help of Hema, other colleagues around Europe, we then had to get ethics approval in France, Spain, and Poland, so that the trial could begin in those sites as well. And we were able to get those in 2019 and 2020. It was delayed, unfortunately, because of Brexit. And if the UK had stayed in Europe, it would have been a lot quicker process. So we had to make some changes there because of that. And then we got the site set up and we're able to open the site to recruitment. And then, of course, COVID hit in 2020. And hospitals around Europe and in the UK were busy looking after people with COVID. And we had to suspend recruitment for a while until the COVID wave came down. So for various reasons, setting up this clinical trial has been a very long process, but I'm so grateful for all of the people who've taken part and helped to get this off the ground and keep this trial going despite the buffeting from COVID and other causes as well. So this is where we are now. Across Europe, 77 people with Wolfram were consented to take part, and we were able to recruit 63 people. So that's absolutely fantastic. This really makes it the largest clinical trial in Wolfram and the only international clinical trial in Wolfram to date. Now, the reason why some people were consented but weren't in the end recruited was because they may have had a different condition, or if they didn't have enough vision to be able to measure it during the course of the trial, it made it very difficult to be able to follow people up. So that's the reason really why some people were consented, but we weren't able to recruit everybody who very kindly volunteered. The age range, the youngest participant is 6, and the oldest participants are over 60 years of age. So a really wide age range. And this is important because if the medicine works, we can say to the regulators, you can give it to anybody with Wolfram of whatever age. And we have 35 males taking part and 23 females. So interestingly, more males than females in this case. You can see here that we've been able to recruit 25 participants in the UK through the specialist clinics here, 15 participants in France, so Montpellier on the South French coast and then Paris, 18 patients in Spain, and I'm incredibly grateful for Hema, who I think is on the call here today as well, for managing to boost up the recruitment to get to the numbers that we needed. And 5 patients from Poland, and Poland absolutely fantastic because they were able to recruit the patients very quickly as soon as we could open the site. The average age is 18, so a bit like Bess Marshall and the Natural History Study in Washington University, these patients tend to be younger, but we do have some quite older adults in there as well. Everybody taking part has got at least one mutation in the Wolfram gene and has either got diabetes or optic atrophy. And that was the minimum that was needed to take part. To take part also, you had to have enough useful vision that we could measure it over a 3-year period. And we've had to go for 3 years, and that's a very long intervention for any clinical trial, because we didn't go for the diabetes option to treat the diabetes. We're trying to slow down the vision loss. And to be able to prove a difference, it takes 3 years of data collection to hopefully see a difference between those people treated with sodium valproate and those people with dummy treatment. We have an independent data monitoring committee, and this is chaired by Professor Karen Morrison, who used to run the Wolfram Clinic for adults in Birmingham. And she and the study statistician are the only people who are allowed to see all the data, and they're the only people who know who's taking sodium valproate and who's taking placebo. and they get to see that data every year. If there's any evidence that there's absolutely no difference between the arms, i.e. the study is futile, they have the power to stop the study straight away. Similarly, if there's any evidence that the treatment is so overwhelmingly positive that there's no point carrying on, they could also stop the treatment. Or if there's evidence that the treatment is unsafe, they can stop it. And I'm pleased to say with each year, they've permitted us to continue the trial. They've not had safety concerns. So that to me has been very, very reassuring. And what's enabled participants to travel from all over the UK to Birmingham to take part is really the support of this charity, Wolfram Syndrome UK, who've done some fantastic fundraising efforts to support patient travel and accommodation to attend. So massive thank you, Tracy, to you and all of your colleagues in Wolfram Syndrome UK for enabling this trial. So this is where the participants have come from. As you would expect, being a European study, about 38, so over half the participants are white European, but we do have participants from the Middle East, Iran, Jordan, other places, Africa, one participant from North America, quite a number from South Asians, that's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, 2 patients from China, and there are some where there's mixed origin or not entirely known. This is really important, again, because if the trial is shown to work, at least there are some participants from each continent, and one can reasonably suggest that it can be prescribed to anybody in the world with Wolfram syndrome, if this works. So where are we now? So participants are visiting every 6 months for an eye check. So at the end of the trial, at the end of the study, we should have at least how many? So 2, 4, 8 vision checks on everybody every 6 months to be able to show what's happening to the change in vision. People are visiting every 12 months for an MRI, and they're measuring really carefully those things that Dr. Bess Marshall mentioned, the special bit of the brainstem volume, so that this data can be used with the Washington St. Louis data to chart progress and hopefully see a difference between those people on sodium valproate and those people on placebo. Everybody is completing a diary for to show that they're taking the tablets, a mood diary, a general well-being diary, monitoring people's sleep and looking at bladder function, because of course we want to see whether the treatment also stabilizes bladder function and sleep and general well-being for people. We are doing the other tests that Dr. Bess Marshall mentioned, the mixed meal tolerance test for diabetes, on a small number of participants here in the UK. And we're doing safety blood tests to measure kidney function and liver to keep everybody safe, pregnancy tests, and also sodium valproate levels, so that at the end of the trial we can be sure who's taking the sodium valproate, you know that. Yeah. So what happens at the end of the trial? So the first participants who started this started in January 2019 and were taking part for 3 years. So they finished in January of this year. The last person who was recruited, patient number 63, was recruited last October. So they will finish in October 2024. At that point, we should have data on about 63 participants at that point who will have completed the trial. And a couple who've left the trial early, but who very kindly consented for us to continue to collect their data. We then collect up all of that information on those questionnaires, the blood tests, the vision checks, the OCT and the MRI scans from the sites, and then we have a look at all those results. We should know by late 2024 the primary outcome. Does sodium valproate work to slow down the vision loss? We should have an answer. And the study will give us a definite answer. It'll be a definite answer. It either works or it doesn't. There won't be anything in between. We will know whether it works or not. If it works, and of course I really hope that it will, we then put in a rapid application to the European Medicines Agency and the UK regulatory agencies and the FDA to get it licensed for use in Wolfram. And we will partner with a drug company to do this, to do it as quickly as possible. And I've seen that process done in 4 months with other medicines before. As soon as it's got a license to be used in Wolfram, it's available for every doctor in Europe and hopefully the States to be able to prescribe it to treat Wolfram syndrome. And that would be the end. Now, at the moment, I don't know because I'm not allowed to see the data, but I know some participants who really feel that they've benefited from it and feel that it's really stabilized the vision. And some participants who are not sure, who feel that they don't know what medicines they're on and the vision has continued to progress. That's why we have to do a clinical trial, because just looking at small numbers of people or people who know what they're taking doesn't prove whether it works or not. So that's why we have to do it this way. Yeah. So I'm going to end here because that really gives you the update where we are, by saying what other clinical trials are going on at the moment. So I'll deal really with what I know about in terms of Europe, where we are with other studies. And I've got 2 to talk about. One of these is AudioWolf, and this is a clinical trial going on in France. It's led by Professor Marc Péchanski and Dr. Christophe Orsaud. They're also using sodium valproate, and they're using it on participants whose vision isn't good enough to take part in the TREATWolfram trial. So they're looking as an outcome measure on hearing. So they're recruiting adults with poor vision who've got some reduced hearing, giving them sodium valproate, and they're looking at the effect on the hearing tests over time. The studying is being run from Paris, and they're currently recruiting participants across France and near countries to that as well. That study is due to go on and will probably report in about 2024 as well. So it's an interesting study looking at a slightly different outcome measure. The other one that we haven't got funded yet, but we've applied for, is to the European Union major research grant campaign called Horizon Europe. It's led by my colleague, Professor Pietro Maffei in Italy, and it involves ourselves in the UK, colleagues in Germany, Spain, France, Portugal as well. And if this comes off, this will be to test liraglutide. So we talked about liraglutide earlier on as a treatment for diabetes. And it's going to be a clinical trial to see whether liraglutide can be used to treat Wolfram and other rare diseases as well. It's asking for about 8 million euros. And if it's funded, this clinical trial would start pretty much as TREATWolfram trial finishes. So probably in about the summer of 2024, summer to autumn 2024. It was a lot of work putting this together, and I'm very grateful from our Italian colleagues for doing the bulk of the work for this. We should find out if it's awarded in December, about Christmas time this year, and I'm hoping that I can come back to this meeting next year, hopefully with a result to say that where we're going with this. But I think the point is that research never ends. It always keeps going, and we're always trying to find the next treatment, the next best treatment. And what we need to get to is as many of these into clinical trials, clinical studies as possible, if we're going to get them to the patients in the clinic. So be assured, we're not just stopping with TREATWolfram. Our team in Birmingham and across Europe are looking to get other studies and other trials funded as well to go forward. So I'm going to end here on the teams for whom I'm really grateful for. The clinical trials team in Birmingham, led by Darren Barton and Ruth Evans is there now. My colleagues Ben Wright, Renica Diaz, and others as well, who've done a superlative effort managing Brexit, drug supply issues, COVID and everything to keep the clinical trial going. And our international collaborators, Hema, Christophe, Agath, Wojciech, who have been doing fantastic work to keep participants in the studies across Europe. I'm incredibly grateful to Tammy, Dr. Bess Marshall and Dr. Fumi Arano for being very generous in sharing their data to enable this trial to occur, and the patient support groups, Tracy especially, but also the I Hope Foundation, the Snow Foundation and the French Wolfram Association for really helping support and enabling this trial to be able to collect research samples that can be shared with the rest of the community when we get to the end of the trial. And then in the laboratory, Malgosia Zatika and Dewey Astuti and other colleagues, including Zhu Zhenaji, who had the concept and did the laboratory work in the first place to enable this clinical trial to take part. And I'm really hoping as we come towards the end of this clinical trial that I'll be able to come back and share the results with you as soon as we really have them at that point. And so with that, I'll thank you from Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital and University Hospital Birmingham.
Thank you, Tim. Really upbeat talk and sort of really informative to tell us where we're at currently with the TREATWolfram trial. I'd just like to welcome Ben as well, Dr. Ben Wright, who joined us during the presentation. So hello, Ben, thank you for joining us today. So we have some questions that have come in on the Q&A, and we also had some questions that had come in prior to today. Shall I start with the ones in the Q&A, Tim? Tim and Ben, they'll come to both of you. What is the dose of valproate being used in the study in adults and in paediatric patients?
Okay, so I'll do the paediatric patients bit, then I'll pass over to Ben for the adult bit, if that's okay. So children, we're starting with 10 milligrams per kilogram as initial dose, and then escalating up to the highest tolerated dose, which is approximately 30 milligrams per kilogram at that point. But really, until a dose is the maximum dose that's tolerated. And this was the advice from the European Medicines Agency Protocol Assistance Committee that says try and use the highest tolerated dose to show that there's an effect. If you can show there's an effect, then we can get it licensed and then try prescribing smaller doses. But the reason is because we want to show that it really works. That's the reason. Ben, did you want to comment on the adults?
Thank you. You know how the simplest questions can trip you up? So I'm going to appeal to perhaps people in the trial if I get this wrong, but I think it's 800 milligrams twice a day for the adult patients. Again, we do a titration phase to get them up there, and if people perhaps running into some problems, we can titrate it back down to a tolerable level. But we aim for a target dose of 800 milligrams twice a day. I see Tim nodding his head, so unfortunately I think I've been paying attention. So that's good.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got a thank you for all the effort. This person's read that the AMX0035 changes some gene functionality. Is there any information like this for the sodium valproate?
So we think that there is certainly some evidence that sodium, if people have partially functioning Wolfram protein, sodium valproate may increase the expression of that protein. And that's research data that's been shown. So it's another mechanism by which sodium valproate might be working. And that's laboratory data. We don't yet have that data from patients.
Lovely, thank you. Bess has said terrific work, wonderful study design, congratulations on the progress, looking forward to the results. I think we're all looking forward to the results. Okay, questions that have come in prior to today. This young lady, she's been diagnosed since a decade, so for over a decade, and have no answers to when treatment will be available. She says it seems like patients are sitting in the darkness. Any comment on that?
All I can say is my heart goes out to you. I mean, I think Ben and I would both feel, you know, we absolutely get this. It's a horrendous situation and must be incredibly frustrating for patients and carers as well for this. All I can say is that we have to go through these clinical trials, and it's really been laid down by law for safety reasons, because what we can't do is just give tablets out like Smarties and then people to get horrible side effects. So although it's really frustrating, these rules are there for a reason, and they're there to protect patients from over-enthusiastic doctors, for instance. You know, we just have to keep patients safe. Ben, I don't know whether you want to add anything there at all for that.
No, I think I echo your thoughts, and clearly, you know, this is not a position we wanted to be in. You know, with Tim's work, saw that timeline there, you know, started many years ago, and it could quite easily have been completely scuppered by the events that Tim went, and actually without Tim there at the helm steering this through, I don't think we'd be in this position now with a number of people who have kindly agreed to take part in a trial, and I do say to people I see at the research visits, and I say again now, I'm really, deeply moved by the fact patients will give up their time to come in, and the families come to support them as well with this endeavor, where they don't know whether they are going to be on the active arm or placebo. It really, my hat goes off to them. So thanks for the support. But I appreciate the questioner, and I think it's research like this which does work. And as you can see, I think it does spawns perhaps future work. So if it shows that this trial mechanism works, even if this particular product doesn't work, it builds up a mechanism by which other trials could be set up for this rare condition, which my knowledge, I see other people in my clinic with other rare conditions, and there is nothing going on. It's very sad. So hopefully this work will spawn others in the future to come.
And I should just add to that, I also echo Ben's absolute massive thanks to participants who've given their time for this. We never intended the trial to take this long, and I think Brexit, COVID, and drug supply issues and things have all played their part in it. But I'm so grateful for participants who've hung on in there, and if we can just keep this going till the end, we will get a definite result from it. So thank you very much for everybody who's participating.
Thank you. If there is a complete depletion of warfarin, do you think valproate is still beneficial?
So I'll start on this one, and then Ben can chip in too. So there's good mouse data and cell data and new mouse data as well, showing that valproate is beneficial through several different mechanisms, partly by putting up proteins that protect the cells, and partly by treating endoplasmic reticulum stress. And this is even in people who don't make any warfarin protein whatsoever. So this is why we're hopeful that this medicine can treat everybody with warfarin syndrome, and not just those who still make a bit of protein left.
Wonderful. Ben, did you have anything to add to that at all?
No, I think it's it's a good question, and trials like this we'll find out, because presumably with the genetics that we know about these patients, we'll be able to link some of this back to that.
Yeah, so we know the warfarin gene mistake or mutation in every participant. We have that, and many participants are not making any warfarin protein at all, and a few are making some. So we should be able to get an answer to that question.
Lovely, thank you. Is sodium valproate effective only on optic atrophy? Is there any effect on other warfarin symptoms? Well, obviously you have covered that slightly with obviously the audio wolf trial that's starting.
So the main aim of the clinical trial is to try and have an effect on the optic atrophy, because that's what patient support groups said they wanted us to do, and that concurs with Bess Marshall's presentation from the occupational therapist in Washington St. Louis. But we're trying to, because we're only doing one trial, we're trying to measure other things as well. So we're looking at hearing loss, sleep deprivation, bladder function, diabetes control, and other things of like balance and walking things as well, so that if there is any signal of an improvement in any of the other features, we're hoping to be able to pick it up with this trial.
Wonderful, thank you. On the questions that have come in, some of those you sort of had covered, because obviously it has the sodium valproate trial shown to be effective in slowing down vision, and has there been any data on sodium valproate? We did sort of cover that there isn't at the moment, because it's all blinded.
So at the moment, Ben and I are not allowed to know whether sodium valproate is having any effect on vision. The only people who know will be the trial statistician and the chair of the data monitoring committee. All we can say, I guess, is that they don't have any safety concerns at the moment. They're happy for us to continue. That they're not seeing any sign that this is dangerous for patients, and I think that's an important thing to mention, really. What was the other bit of that question, Tracy?
Has there been any data on sodium valproate? So
yeah, so the data on sodium valproate in warfarin is animal based and cell model based, and in fact there was a recent paper out just last year about sodium valproate in a mouse or a rat model, showing that it treats the underlying disease mechanism in it. So the publications on sodium valproate so far are quite reassuring. that hopefully we're on the right lines. Yeah.
Wonderful. There is a question, it's not really to do with the TREATWolfram trial or anything, but this person has asked, has the NHS Medicine Fund been applied to get early access to drugs or medicines approved for conditions like Wolfram syndrome, as this fund supports rare diseases?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And Ben and I and others have had a lot of discussions about this as well. We are aware of this fund. We have, and there is equivalent funds like this in Europe as well. We have thought about applying for this fund, but this fund will only give access if there's clear evidence of benefit. And that's the whole point of the trial. So I think if we get to the end of the trial and it clearly works, we can do that early access fund to get the medicines to patients while we're waiting to get the licensing application sorted out. Unfortunately, I think Ben would agree, we can't apply for it now until we've actually got some evidence that it's actually doing that it's working.
Yes, just to agree, yes.
Okay, thank you for the amazingly clear presentations. You mentioned the liraglutide trial would also be taking place in Germany. Which team is taking part? This is coming from a support worker of a WS affected person in Germany. And she says her client is affected by most symptoms. Is there any study covering this group?
So the application is a consortium led by Italy, and they very kindly invited our teams in Birmingham to participate should they be funded. The team in Germany is led by Professor Thomas Danner in University of Hanover, but he runs a European registry for people with diabetes that recruits participants from all over Europe. So if your patient, wherever your patient is in Germany, then, and assuming this gets funded, they may well be able to participate in this as well. Now, there have been clinical studies reported of liraglutide in Wolfram that appear to show benefit in treating the diabetes, but I have to say the data on the vision is equivocal. It's really not clear cut. And I think some participants have reported they've felt benefit and others said, no, the vision still got worse. So this is why we need to do a clinical trial for this. And if we get the funding from the European Union, obviously we'll be able to go ahead.
Lovely, thank you. One other question that's come in previously. Do you have any suggestions on what patients can do to slow down their vision loss?
So the only public, and again, I'm not an expert on this, and I'll defer to Ben in a minute, but the published data that I've seen has been from Dr. Julia Roheim in Germany, who followed up patients in Germany over time, was able to show that those people who had the most stable glucose control and didn't have any severe life events had a slightly slower progression of the vision loss. And the people whose vision loss progressed faster tended to have a poorer diabetes control, or had an acute illness like acute influenza, or had to have major surgery. And these sort of shocks to the body system seem to coincide with a more rapid vision loss in those as well. So I guess the best evidence we've got is trying to keep good diabetes control, and then trying to have your influenza immunization, those sorts of things as well, COVID vaccines clearly as well, and obviously taking great care if you have to go in for major surgery or something like that.
So I would agree. I mean, before Tim mentioned it, I was thinking, a good diabetic diabetes mellitus control would be a key factor here to try and help preserve retinal and optic nerve function.
Lovely, thank you. Is there a role for vitamin supplementation, vitamin A or similar, for preventing vision loss?
Again, I think all we know is that it's sensible to have healthy levels of vitamins. I don't think there's any harm in taking a regular multivitamin supplement. I do, and I'm sure lots of other people do as well. We've got no evidence that it slows the vision loss in Wolfram. And obviously, with things like vitamin A, you just have to be a bit careful you don't overdose on it, because too much is poisonous. Yeah.
Lovely.
I think my take is just perhaps a bit more nuanced. I think if you have vitamin deficiencies, then yes, replacing that is clearly important. But I don't think there's any evidence to say that taking multivitamins helps. And unfortunately, a lot of actually multivitamins you take actually just comes out in poo. Very little of it is actually absorbed. So even though it says 100% recommended daily allowance, what have you, actually a tiny gets in. So actually it's more important to have a healthy diet, because you evolved to absorb the vitamins from that. So that's just my personal take. Obviously I'm happy to, people have different views.
Is it worth taking the views of a dietitian when people go to see their local diabetes nurse or consultant and discuss any possibility of taking additional supplements with them? So
I think that's very good advice, Tracy. I think that's right. So certainly in our populations in Birmingham, quite a lot of people are vitamin D deficient, and some people are iron deficient. And that's why perhaps we're a little bit more relaxed about taking vitamin supplements. But other parts of the world with perhaps healthier diets don't need them, as Ben suggested.
Okay, lovely. Can you mitigate the bad consequences of surgery somehow for someone who needs surgery relatively frequently, like regular Botox injections? How do you decide what is more important after having had major surgery like Mitrofanoff 2?
So I don't think so. By major surgery, it's like the operation called Mitrofanoff, but botulinum injections is minor surgery, and I don't think that's going to cause a risk at all. So I wouldn't really say that sort of surgery. In terms of major surgery, making sure one is healthy state beforehand as possible, and making sure that the doctors are just aware of the condition and that the anaesthetist is in making sure that the person is properly prepared and looked after during that period. That's all one can say, really.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I think that is all the questions. We'll probably have some pop up, just like we've had on the other two talks, as I'm sort of winding up the yes, there we go. What is the role of DHA supplements and Idebenone, I've got it correct, in slowing down vision loss?
Okay, so I'm going to hazard a guess at this, and Ben may well know the answer better than me. As far as I understand it, there hasn't been a clinical trial proving that these supplements slow or prevent vision loss. There is anecdotal evidence from some people who feel benefit and others who don't feel benefit. But I think at the moment we just don't know. Ben, I'm going to hand over to you there, because I don't know any more than that.
Yes, I agree, and this is the difficulty here. So people may trial these things and perceive a benefit, and it might be a real benefit, but because it's not party to a trial, we just don't know. And as slow and laborious it is, that's why we need these trials to figure these answers out. So there's no evidence as far as I'm aware for these products.
I don't know if you're able to answer this. What is the best Idebenone dose for a child aged 8?
So no, I can't. I don't know the answer to that, but I know who to ask. So what we can do is speak to Dr. Patrick UY Mann, who's our sort of resident ophthalmologist, and we've also got Dr. Susie Mollen, who's also an expert for adults here as well, but Ben's colleague. So we could make some inquiries and perhaps have an answer back to you for next week's conference, if that would be helpful.
That'd be great, thank you. And I can then also email it to the person that has asked the question, because I'll get that in the report. Okay, lovely, thank you. It looks like that may be it for questions. So thank you to both Professor Tim Barrett and Dr. Ben Wright